Hi guys! Now, some of you probably know that we have been making maps for World War II channel for more than a year now. If you ever wondered what would happen if we combined all the clips into a single video, then you have come to the right place. We have removed some clips that did not suit and re-edited the rest into a single video. This video covers the World War from September the 1st, 1939 to 31st of August 1940. You can use the timestamps to move to the event of your interest. The video begins with the German invasion of Poland. Then there is the Finnish Winter War, the German invasion of Norway, and finally the ultimate showdown in the Battle of France. Now just sit back, make yourself comfortable, and let pure World War II content be loaded into your mind.
Fedor von Bock leads Army Group North, which is made up of the 3rd Army under Georg von Küchler and the 4th Army under Gunther von Kluge. General Gerd von Rundstedt leads Army Group South, Johannes Blaskowitz with the 8th Army, Walter von Reichenau the 10th, and Wilhelm List the 14th. The Panzer Corps is under Heinz Guderian and Paul von Kleist. Rundstedt's forces advance from Silesia, and this is the main German attack. Blaskowitz is on the left, heading towards Poznan, List on the right towards Krakow, with Reichenau the main thrust in the center to the Vistula River between Warsaw and Sandomierz. Küchler from East Prussia heads south towards Warsaw and the Bug River to the east. Kluge will cross the Polish corridor and then head south. Is already across the Warta River after a series of quick but costly battles near the border. Krakow is pretty near the front lines already by now. The German advance is now in their rear, preventing reserves from coming in and ruining Polish communications. Has now penetrated to the east of Łódź. Krakow falls to elements of Wilhelm List's 14th Army. They order the army to pull back to the rivers Narew, Vistula, and San. Within a day, the Narew defenders are ordered further back to the Bug. The Polish naval base at Westerplatte surrenders after heavy German bombardment, and at the end of the week, Reichenau's advance units reach the Warsaw suburbs in the late afternoon of the 8th. List's army reaches the River San, both north and south of Przemysl. Heinz Guderian's Panzer Corps is attacking along the Bug River east of Warsaw, swarmed across Poland, penetrating to the east of Łódź, and even taking Krakow. Britain, France, New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa declare war on Germany. Most Polish forces have retired east of the Vistula River, but actually a lot of them have regrouped around Kutno. Are there with more arriving. They attack across the Bzura River against Kluge's 8th Army. On the 11th, the Germans cross the River San. On the 13th, a small German force crosses the Vistula south of Warsaw. The following day, the Germans enter Gdynia, and the Panzer Corps reaches Brest-Litovsk. That day, the 14th, they also enter Przemysl, has retreated eastward, and has planned to maybe regroup around Lvov. But those hopes are dashed on the 17th. By the 19th, Soviet advanced troops reach the Hungarian border. In the north, Vilna falls. The Soviets link up with the Germans at Brest-Litovsk. And as the week comes to an end, the Soviets take Lvov, that the new border be along the East Prussian border to the river Narew, then down to the Bug River to the Ruthenian border. So the USSR can use bases in Estonia. The idea behind the pact, and spoiler, pact soon offered to Latvia and Lithuania, is to ensure Soviet control of the Baltic. The Germans have had the garrisons at both Modlin and Hel Peninsula under siege. Hel was 20 miles long and just a mile wide. In China, the First Battle of Changsha ends this week. This is the first major battle of the Second Sino-Japanese War, the war between China and Japan that's been going on the past 2 years, to fall within the scope of this channel. By September 23rd, the Chinese had been driven from the Xinjiang River region, and Changsha had been surrounded on 3 sides. By the end of September, advanced Japanese troops had reached the outskirts of the city. Within days, the Chinese will have retaken the territory they'd lost in Hunan, Hubei, and Jiangxi provinces. On the 30th, a series of landmines are detonated. This nearly cuts off the peninsula from the mainland. In the Baltics, Latvia agrees to allow the Soviet Union to use their military bases to spare themselves from an occupation. Now on the 10th, Lithuania signs a 15-year mutual assistance pact with them. They must lease the Hanko Peninsula to the USSR and also give over control of several islands in the Gulf of Finland, of the Rybaki Peninsula up near Murmansk, and the port of Petsamo up there. In the Karelian Isthmus should be moved to a point 20 miles east of Viipuri, and existing fortifications in Karelia destroyed, would have to abandon their main defense, the Mannerheim Line. Last week, the Soviet Union made demands on Finland for territorial concessions, ostensibly to protect their own borders. There are 5 invasion routes, from Karelia in the south to Petsamo in the north, with the 9th Army trying to cut Finland in half at the middle. The Finnish defenses in Karelia southwest of Lake Ladoga are known as the Mannerheim Line. And now, the Russian invasion, the 7th Army on the Karelian Isthmus. The objective is to break the Mannerheim Line, the main Finnish defense system, take Viipuri, and then advance on Helsinki. This will be the strongest Russian attack, with between 12 and 14 divisions and 3 tank brigades. The 8th Army, just north of Lake Ladoga, 6 rifle divisions and 2 tank brigades. Its goal is to circle the northern shore, break through the defenses there, and then hit the Mannerheim Line from behind. The 9th Army, 5 divisions and a few attached armored units. They are to attack westward further north and cut the country in half. The 14th Army in the far north, 3 divisions heading from Murmansk towards Petsamo and then Rovaniemi. Soviet General Kirill Meretskov advances on the Karelian Isthmus with 120,000 men and 1,000 tanks. The first major Russian attack is at Taipale, on the extreme flank of the line up by Lake Ladoga, on the 6th. This is actually a feint to draw away Finnish troops before attacking the Finnish center at Summa, but it doesn't fool the Finns, and the Finnish 10th Division is well dug in. No man's land there is a peninsular tip the Finns have voluntarily abandoned that's marshy and devoid of cover. They hope the Russians will attack there in force. And they do, and it becomes a killing ground, every inch of which has been ranged by the Finnish artillery. The Russians take huge casualties and flee when the Finns counterattack. But this was not the first engagement. There was other action all week. On the 2nd, the Red Army takes Petsamo in the north. Soviet naval assaults this week against the ports of Turku, Hanko, and Porvoo are repulsed. The battles of Kola and Suomussalmi begin, and as the week ends, the Finns bring the attacks by the Soviet 9th Army in the Kumo region to a halt. There is serious danger for the Finns in Ladoga, Karelia already from December 1st. The Russian advance just north of the lake threatens Finland's main lateral railway line for the whole Ladoga front, which is the artery for reinforcements to the isthmus. The worst danger is on the Tolvajärvi road, where a Russian division faces an ad hoc formation of just 4 infantry battalions and a bicycle battalion, now on skis though. They hold the Soviets back as well as they could, but by the end of the week, the Red Army has covered half the distance to the railway junction Wärtsilä, and if it should fall, then this whole front will collapse and the Mannerheim Line will be vulnerable from the rear. On December 10th, Chinese nationalist forces attacked the Japanese on Henglingguan Pass, south of Jingshan in northern China. Over the next 3 weeks, this attack will drive the Japanese out of the region. The Chinese also attack Jiangshan itself, and though the Japanese mount a strong counterattack, the Chinese will succeed in taking Longhua near Yisheng next week. On the 13th, the Chinese 47th Corps captures Taihang Mountain and cut the Taosin Railway, taking the stations at Pashan and Changkou. That same day, the Chinese launch an offensive in eastern Shaanxi province and nearly encircle the Japanese 36th Division. On the 9th, the Finns stopped the Soviet 9th Army near Suomussalmi. 2 days later there, the entire Soviet 163rd Division is cut off. The Red Army forces are much larger, but reinforcements have to come down a narrow earth road surrounded by impenetrable forest. But in the south, on the Karelian Isthmus, the only place where you could have large-scale military maneuvers, they attack again at Taipale on the 14th. Meanwhile, north of Lake Ladoga, Finnish commander Carl Gustav Mannerheim has called in reinforcements for the men defending at Tolvajärvi to try to stop the Soviet advance that threatens the railway, their main supply artery to the isthmus. The Finns plan a counterattack for the 11th, but the Russians jumped the gun the night before. The first big Soviet attacks against the center of the Finnish Mannerheim defense line, the Summa sector, come the 17th. First is a 5-hour artillery barrage and airstrikes from around 200 planes. The day's attack then comes in 2 parts. One is against the defenses on the Lade Road. The village of Lade itself, 5 kilometers down the road, is an important strategic junction. In these two attacks, the Russians lose 35 tanks, about a third of the attacking number, and the attacks fail. The next day, 68 tanks attack at Lade. The Finns destroy 25 of them, and the attacks there and at Summa again fail. Fighting on the 19th and 20th at Lade leaves 58 more burned out Russian tanks. On the 20th, a tank battalion runs out of gas in front of Summa and just sits there being picked off piece by piece. 20 tanks do manage to reach Summa village the 20th, but 8 of them are destroyed and the attack fails. It is supposed to be a series of coordinated attacks across China to take back big chunks of territory, from Shaanxi province in the north to Guangxi in the south. And when the Japanese had taken Nanning last month, which cut off that route to the sea, it really impaired the nationalist army's ability to quickly deploy troops. On the 16th, 150,000 men strong, they set out and capture the Kunlun Pass, 60 kilometers north of Nanning in Guangxi province, the 18th. This is a strategic point. The Japanese will take it back the 19th, but, spoiler, will lose it again on the 31st. In other parts of China, on the 16th, the Chinese capture Kaifeng in Henan province after 2 weeks of fighting. On the 18th, the Chinese 6th Cavalry cuts the railroad between Hohhot and Saikin. This prevents the Japanese from moving reinforcements towards Baotou. On the 19th, the Chinese 35th Corps attack Baotou itself and enter the city on the 20th. Near Taipale, east of the Suvanto River, Finnish recon showed that the Russian artillery batteries there outnumbered the Finns 111 to 9. On Christmas Day, under cover of fog, the Soviets attack across the frozen river. The fog betrays them, though, for their beachheads turn out to be exposed to several Finnish machine gun nests when the fog lifts, and they are massacred. Further north, other Soviet units have established themselves at Kelja and await reinforcements. These units are actually behind the Finnish right and close to some lateral roads and could cut off the whole Taipale sector. But for 24 hours, the Finns fight the reinforcements who try to arrive, with the battle very close and seesawing one way and then the other before the Russians can be expelled from Kelja. In total, for the battles of Taipale and Kelja, the Soviets would lose some 12,000 men killed. The Finns, less than a fifth of that killed and wounded. Up in Suomussalmi on the 27th and 28th, a Finnish counterattack in minus 35-degree weather drives the Soviets back across the border. This goes on for another week, and over 25,000 Red Army troops meet their fate in the Battle of Suomussalmi, either killed in action or wounded and then freezing to death. The Finns suffer fewer than 2,000 killed and wounded. After the successes on defense there the past few weeks, they launch an ambitious counterattack, a double pincer movement beyond Summa. There is no armor to give it speed and no communications to make it flexible. They go into action just after a blizzard in minus 20 temperatures, and the Russians might not have been great on offense, but they can dig in and fight just fine. The action is called off mid-afternoon. 10,000 Japanese launch a counterattack in China's Shaanxi province, trying to relieve the nearly surrounded 36th Division. They are driven off by the end of the week. In the Guangzhou region of southern China, Chinese forces take Longshan II, Guandu IV, and Qingtang V. I mentioned the fighting in Finland at Suomussalmi last week. The Russian 163rd Division that had been surrounded and cut off was not even really a fighting force anymore. The 44th Division was supposed to move in and save them at the end of last week, but they ended up not trying. The order was cancelled. Now, 2 Finnish battalions ski over the ice to where the 44th is on the Narrated road, mainly positioned on a 5-mile stretch of the road, but with platoons every 1/8 of a mile securing it all the way back to the Russian border. Tanks patrol between the platoons. The Finns attack the head of the whole column, which causes the Russians to dig in, as the Finns had planned, which gives the Finns time to regroup all the Suomussalmi forces for a new attack. On New Year's Day, that attack begins. They cut the road and fortify the breaking point, and then attack the Russian columns pretty much only hand-to-hand. So the Russians can't use heavy artillery, and all the horse-drawn units add to the traffic chaos on the road. The tanks aren't any real help either, especially once the road is cut and mined. The Finns even use the tanks as cover. Soviet air power watches helplessly from above, since any attack would also be an attack against its own. The Finns saw the segments of the Russian columns that they had isolated curl up like worms. They simply stopped and dug in with their panzers and artillery, and the Finns had no choice but to surround them. In General Voldemar Hägglund's 4th Finnish Army Corps sector, for example, there are 160,000 Soviet troops in an area of just 100 square miles, most of them in mottis or in the process of being formed into a motti. He can't give them a chance to regroup, so reinforcements are called in, and eventually the Finns number nearly 50,000 men. The real danger is the unsurrounded Soviet 168th Division, which together with the 18th Division and the 34th Tank Brigade have joined forces. Hägglund's forces attack beginning the 6th. They'll reach the shores of Lake Ladoga near Koirinoja starting at the end of this week. Meanwhile, other Finnish units arrive from the west to finish surrounding the Soviet units, and this completes the only actually planned motti of the Winter War. Last week, the motti battles, Finnish attacks against surrounded Red Army units, began in earnest. The Soviets had shaken up both their chain of command and their basic tactics, though, and were gearing up for a major offensive. The Soviets have success, however, at Turku Harbor, where the most foreign aid arrives, and where they destroy nearly 80% of the docking facilities. And Viipuri, the second largest Finnish city, is pretty well flattened, mainly by railroad guns fired all the way from Leningrad. They also destroy Mannerheim's headquarters at Mikkeli. The Soviets are going to attack in a wedge, and at the tip of that wedge, the Viipuri Gateway, a 10-mile stretch between the Sumajoki River and Lake Muolanjärvi of comparatively open ground good for tanks. The Poppius Bunker, for example, is an incredibly strong defense fortress near the Lade Road that changed hands several times last month. The Finnish 5th Division in the rear at the intermediate line is rested, but Finnish commander Carl Gustav Mannerheim does not send them in, despite the pleas from the men under attack. The 5th is the only division he has that could head in and defend the Viipuri Gateway. It comes on the Lade Road, northeast of Suma. The only real defensive fortifications remaining there are two structures that dominate the approach, the $1 Million Bunker and the Poppius Bunker. Their main job is to take out one or both of the main posts. They're attacking here instead of at Suma because not only is Suma way tougher, but a breakthrough here would in fact cause the Finns to abandon Suma anyhow. And if the Soviets can break through the second line, about 1 kilometer deep, they can take the road junctions that are the key to the whole sector. The Finns soon have no choice but to flee the bunker and fight from the local earthworks. At 12:30, a red banner rises above Poppius. On the Finnish left, the swamp is too heavy for armor, so it's only Russian infantry that assaults what's called the Valley of Death. But when Soviet tanks begin to arrive there from behind from the Lade Road, the Finns are forced to pull back there as well. Only at the $1 Million Bunker on the right do the Finnish positions hold. Managed to withdraw, still in good order, to the support line. By the evening of that second day, the Red Army has consolidated the Lade Road salient. The Finnish counterattack on Lade comes on the 13th, but it's too little and too late. It is not the whole 5th Division either. Mannerheim planned to throw all 3 regiments of the division in, but he had to peel off 2 of them for other emergencies. What does happen then is a Soviet armored attack that breaks through and sees a wedge of 50 tanks crash into the Finnish rear. Soon, they have a clear run over good ground to Viipuri, Finland's second largest city, but they stop and wait for other units to catch up. On the 14th, the Soviets widen the Lade salient, putting pressure on Suma from the rear and causing the Finns to begin withdrawing from Suma after 70 days of holding out against everything the Red Army had to throw at them. At 4 p.m. on February 15th, Finnish commander Carl Gustav Mannerheim orders a general retreat of the Finnish Second Corps to the intermediate line. On the Viipuri Gateway, it's as strong as the Mannerheim line had been. Other sections are what one Finnish general calls colored lines on a map. By the 18th, the Soviets are there in force, making savage attacks. There is still one part of the Mannerheim line that holds, though, the left flank over at Taipale, and this is a pretty tempting target for the Soviets. I mean, Taipale is becoming a salient that the Soviet right is outpacing as it advances. If the Finns have any reserve divisions to throw in, this is the perfect place to seriously hurt the Soviets. So the Soviets decide to try to eliminate the salient once and for all, as an entire Soviet division runs roughshod over a regiment of Finnish rookie replacements. But though the Soviets take some big strong points and certainly damage the position, the Finnish veterans in the support line still hold the sector through the end of the week. The 1st and 2nd divisions are now grouped as the 1st Army Corps, positioned between the 2nd and 3rd Corps, and Öqvist's 2nd Corps will now concentrate on the defense of Viipuri. As the week nears its end, anybody can see that Koivisto Island will soon be cut off. But the Soviets are preparing an all-out assault, and the defenders are needed elsewhere, so on the 23rd they begin to evacuate. Of course, the Red Army can then move up the coastal roads, and by the end of the day are taking advanced positions beyond Koivisto Island. Öqvist asks Mannerheim if he should draw up plans for a retreat to the rear defense line, just in case. But Mannerheim says no. In the field, as this week gets underway, the intermediate line begins bending under the strain of the Red Army. Within a day or two at Honkaniemi Station, for example, the Finns are down to just 40 or so defenders. But there, the 26th, comes something rather unique. The only Finnish armored attack of the entire Winter War. Yep. By then, Finnish commander Carl Gustav Mannerheim has given his go-ahead for a retreat to the 3rd line of defense, the rear line, and the assault is against positions that were mostly empty. The Gulf of Viipuri had never figured in pre-war planning by the Finnish army. The islands that screened Viipuri from the sea were fortified, but not against an over-the-ice offensive from the Finnish coast. The Soviets can attack the coastline, but only after they make it past the islands. And there are Finnish garrisons on dozens of them, and they delay and delay the Soviets, and every hour of that means an hour beefing up the defenses in Viipuri. Interesting, though, to think why the Finns are even defending Viipuri and the rear line. I mean, to the west are lakes that funnel an invader into pretty decent defensive ground. Why not pull back there? Well, Viipuri is kind of the only bargaining chip the Finns still have at the negotiating table. By the 5th, there are 30 Soviet divisions and over 1,000 tanks and 1,000 aircraft attacking the rear line and the coast. Soon, the Soviets have a small beachhead, and if they can expand it, there is basically nothing between them and Helsinki. By the 6th, fighting has reached the suburbs of Viipuri, and 2nd Corps are down to around 600 shells, all calibers together. By the 8th, the Russian beachhead has indeed expanded, and they are shelling the Viipuri-Helsinki highway. If they can occupy that road, they can cut off 2nd Corps and surround Viipuri. And that is the week. A peace treaty is signed between Finland and the Soviet Union, one that causes the Allies to abandon their plans for invading Norway. But Hitler's northern plans are still very much on the table. The Soviets will move the Finnish border and take the whole Karelian Isthmus, including Viipuri. This region is currently home to 12% of the Finnish population. The Soviets will lease Hanko Peninsula, take the Ribaki Peninsula, a bunch of islands off the coast, and some land near Salla. On the 3rd, 3 German supply ships, disguised as colliers, leave Germany for Narvik. By disguise, I mean they carry coal as they should, but underneath the coal is loads of artillery and ammunition. German troops are on destroyers waiting for the call to leave port for Stavanger, Trondheim, Kristiansand, Oslo, and Bergen. The Danish invasion is focused on Aalborg at the tip of Jutland. This is going to be taken by a parachute platoon and an airborne battalion, with infantry moving up quickly from the German border for support and 5 groups on ships making landings on the west coast of Jutland. Air power is to play a big role. Stavanger, for example, is to be taken by air. 500 transport planes are to bring in 3,000 airborne troops in total to take the largest airfield in Norway. After the first 1,500 or so have landed, transports will bring infantry and artillery to the harbor. The Narvik group of 2,000 initial troops leaves Germany at midnight the 6th, escorted partway by the battleships Gneisenau and Scharnhorst. The Trondheim group sails at the same time, 1 cruiser and 4 destroyers with nearly 2,000 men. The Bergen group, 2,000 men on 2 cruisers and 9 smaller ships, are to leave the 7th. They are soon to be reinforced by aircraft and transport ships. The Kristiansand group is smaller, only around 1,000 men on a cruiser and 11 smaller ships, but it has a major mission: to land a party of men at Arendal and cut the phone line that leaves Norway there for Britain, sabotaging Norwegian communication with the outside world. The Oslo group, on the other hand, has more resources since Oslo is the capital. 3 cruisers, supporting ships, and a bunch of minesweepers will leave the 7th and land roughly 2,000 men. A parachute regiment will then drop in and secure Fornebu airfield, paving the way for transport aircraft to bring in infantry and engineers. Artillery, AA guns, gasoline, and tanks will then arrive by transport ship. One final little group of 4 minesweepers are to be sent to Egersund with but 150 men. They are to cut the phone line there that goes to Peterhead, Scotland. The British Admiralty thinks that the Germans are going to try to break out into the Atlantic to attack British sea lanes. So they deployed much of the home fleet a long way from Norway. On the 8th, the British destroyer Glowworm meets part of the German fleet off Trondheim Fjord. Glowworm rams the heavy cruiser Hipper, but then bursts into flames and sinks. The Polish submarine Orzel, now with the British, sinks the German transport Rio de Janeiro in the Skagerrak. 2 divisions under General Kaupisch invade Denmark, and Denmark surrenders during the day. The heavy cruiser Blücher, leading the convoy into Oslo harbor, is sunk with 1,000 men aboard, including most of the headquarters staff. It takes the whole day for Oslo Fjord to be opened for passage. At Stavanger, they take the airport, but most of the airborne unit's supplies are sunk by a Norwegian destroyer. The landings at Bergen and Trondheim go more closely as planned. There's fog, though, at Kristiansand that hides the entrance to the fjord, and this thwarts even torpedo boats trying to bring men ashore. There is a big naval encounter this day, though, between the British battlecruiser Renown and the German ones Gneisenau and Scharnhorst. A bomber force from Germany's 10th Air Corps attacks the British off Bergen, sinking a destroyer and damaging a battleship and 2 cruisers. By the end of April 9th, all important Norwegian ports are in German hands. British Captain Warburton Lee and 5 destroyers head up Narvik Fjord. 10 German destroyers are in inlets up there. On the 12th, German forces begin pushing out from Oslo. Gneisenau, Scharnhorst, and Hipper are attacked by land and carrier-based British aircrafts, but the attacks fail. The British do occupy the Faroe Islands, though. Last week, Germany invaded Norway, and by the end of the week had taken all major Norwegian ports, though at sea, the German Navy had not fared well against the British. The Allies are already landing forces of their own in Norway this week. At the end of last week, the Germans pushed out from Oslo east, north, and west. They now have some quick successes, forcing some Norwegians to surrender and others to cross into Sweden. But Norwegian General Otto Ruge is pretty well positioned between Randsfjord and Lake Mjøsa to take on the German force heading for him. And the Luftwaffe is mostly grounded until the 17th by weather. But after that, with a panzer battalion, the Germans take ground both east and west of the lake. Ruge's basic plan is to stop the Germans in the passes leading from Oslo long enough for the British to arrive in force. But if the Germans can make their way up Gudbrandsdal, the Allies landing this week at Åndalsnes to move on Trondheim would be threatened from the rear. On the 14th come small British landings at Namsos and Harstad. The Allies are thinking of what to do to free Trondheim and Narvik, but they will rule out direct assault. Instead, they will build up from the landings at Namsos, Harstad, and Åndalsnes. And the British force that was to try and land at Ålesund is held back all week by the weather. Still, the main body of the British 24th Guards arrives in Harstad on the 16th. The 146th Brigade lands at Namsos. On the 17th, the British begin to land at Åndalsnes. When they land there, Ruge demands, does not ask, demands for them to not move on Trondheim as planned, but help consolidate the Norwegian lines just south of Lillehammer. By the 19th, the 146, which has advanced to Steinkjer, is forced to retreat to Namsos. The Germans have complete air superiority and heavily bomb Namsos. There is no natural cover, as I said. Meanwhile, the Germans advancing from Oslo reach Lillehammer and Rena. At the week's beginning on the 21st, Norwegian forces are pushed out of Lillehammer by Germans coming from both sides of Lake Mjøsa. That day sees the first fighting between Germans and the British 148th Brigade east of the lake, and it does not go well for the British. The next day at Tretten, 2 British battalions take on 3 German ones that have air, artillery, and armor support. This is a key position, and it gives access to Gudbrandsdal. Each day, the first half of the week actually, the 148th are forced to retreat north of Lillehammer by the German advance up the Gudbrandsdal. Now, the night of the 23rd, the 15th Brigade lands at Molde and Andalsnes and heads to relieve them. By the 24th, as the Germans reach Rendalen, and over the remainder of the week, General Paget and the 15th engage the Germans in Gudbrandsdal. At the end of the week, the British decide they will evacuate Namsos and Andalsnes, which means ending all attempts to reach Trondheim. The Germans take Steinkjer to the north of Trondheim the 22nd. De Wiart orders his men back to Namsos, and the whole British operation in central Norway is a ruin. An attack on Trondheim is no longer possible. So there's no point sitting around Namsos being bombed. The 148th is in worse trouble to the south, since the Germans are threatening to outflank them from Osterdal. And British aircraft can fly from Bardufoss airfield. British, French, and Polish troops have landed and are well established around Narvik, which the Germans occupied. And the Allies also have the Norwegian 6th Division fighting with them, the only fully mobilized Norwegian division. They are all preparing to retake Narvik and have been making probing attacks for 2 weeks now. The operation will be known as the Battle of Zhaoyang Yishang and begins this week on May the 1st after the Japanese 11th Army is beefed up by 2 divisions and ordered to take Yishang. If they can do this, they can hopefully move down the Yangtze River to Chongqing, where the Chinese nationalist capital is currently located. 3 of the Japanese army divisions attack into northern Hubei province on the hunt for Chinese General Tang Enbo and his 31st Army Group. Chinese General Zhang Zizhong brings in his forces from the east, which peels off 2 of the Japanese divisions, and the other one will be beaten up by Tang's men, taking some 4,000 casualties. The Germans are still advancing north from Trondheim in Norway, but Allied troops are arriving at Harstad and Tromsø. Just now it's Poles and the French Foreign Legion. By the 7th, some 5,000 Polish mountain troops have landed at Harstad, so the Allies have over 20,000 men near Narvik, the Germans only around 5,000. Henri Giraud's 7th French Army is to move up the coast to Breda in the Netherlands. The 22 Belgian divisions cover the line between Antwerp and Louvain on the Dyle River. That is, if they have to fall back from holding off the Germans on the Albert Canal. The 9 British divisions hold the Dyle from Louvain to Wavre. General Georges Blanchard's French First Army covers central Belgium from Louvain to Namur. General André Korap's French 9th Army is to head into the Belgian Ardennes and cover the line along the Meuse from Namur to a bit north of Sedan. General Charles Hunziker covers the Meuse from where it enters France north of Sedan to the Franco-German border. So the pivot point of the French army is between the 9th and 2nd armies. Now, all these French armies form the 1st Army Group under General Gaston Bilotte. The 2nd and 3rd Army Groups are further south behind the Maginot Line and in Alsace-Lorraine. And the 4th Army Group is way in the south, covering the Italian border and the Alps. The weakest of these forces are Korap's and Hunziker's. Korap has just 9 divisions to cover a front of 75 kilometers on paper, but longer in reality because of the twists and turns of the river Meuse. 2 are light cavalry who will, if an attack comes there, advance from the river and try to delay the attack while the infantry takes position. But of his 7 infantry divisions, only 2 are regular infantry, and 2 are Series B reserve divisions comprised of men over 35. Hunziker also has 9 divisions, and they cover the 75 kilometers of the French Ardennes. They also have 2 Series B reserve divisions. Wilhelm von Lieb's Army Group C is to hold the Franco-German border opposite the French Maginot Line. Gerd von Rundstedt's Army Group A in the center, led by 3 armored corps in the vanguard, advances into the Ardennes. Paul Kleist has Heinz Guderian and Georg Hans Reinhardt's corps under his command, heading for Sedan and Monterme. Hermann Hotz makes for Dinant. They advance rapidly against little opposition, which they easily brush aside. Fedor von Bock's Army Group B makes far more spectacular attacks on the right against Belgium and the Netherlands, though. Paratroopers dropping from the sky deep inside Holland, beginning at 4:30 a.m., paralyzed Dutch resistance. They plan to retreat to the defenses of Fortress Holland, the region of waterways near Amsterdam and Rotterdam. But the Germans ruined that plan in hours, flying over and landing the 22nd Airborne Division in its heart. In Belgium, a German airborne force of 78 paratroopers lands atop Fort Eben Emael in gliders, totally surprises the defenders, and puts the fortress out of action. It is in fact the linchpin of the main Belgian defense line and covers the junction of the River Meuse and the Albert Canal. Attacks such as this grab British and French attention, and by the evening they have mostly moved to their planned positions on the Dielet line, which I talked about last week. In the Netherlands, German airborne units take the Moerdijk Causeway and cut the country in two, and the Dutch army withdraws north towards Rotterdam and Amsterdam. The French 7th Army, which has advanced to Breda to try to link with the Dutch forces, now finds that task impossible. Its commander, Henri Giraud, is ordered to fall back from Breda and redeploy further south near Antwerp. See, the evening of the 13th, advance units of the German 39th Army Corps reach the city. For Giraud's French units retreating from Breda, many are badly mauled and some even surrounded. The remaining French forces concentrate on Walcheren, where the French Navy launches a large-scale evacuation, and by midnight on the 17th, French resistance on Walcheren is finished and the battle for the Netherlands is over. In Belgium, the brilliant German capture of Fortress Eben Emael last week compromised the Belgian defenses, so they decided to pull back from the Albert Canal to the Diehl River. General Priou, whose cavalry is the advance of that army, arrives in position the 11th to find that the Belgians have done little fortification. He asks permission to fall back to the Schelde River, but is refused. The main bulk of the First Army will arrive the 14th, so Priou is to delay the Germans until then. This he does. His two light mechanized divisions hold off two panzer divisions in the Battle of Hanet. This is the largest tank-on-tank battle in history at this point, with each side fielding over 600 tanks. The French lose 105 tanks, and the Germans 165. So much for the idea that the French are incapable of fighting panzer divisions head-on. The First Army then holds the line on the Diehl the 15th, but because of the breakthrough further south on the Meuse, tactical victory here could turn into an overall strategic disaster, and the First Army is ordered to withdraw to the French border the 16th. Elsewhere in Belgium this week, the Germans take Liège the 13th and enter Brussels and Antwerp the 17th. The British and French have fallen back to the River Dendre, and the Belgian government has moved to Ostend. It is through the Ardennes and spearheaded by panzer divisions under overall command of Ewald von Kleist. 3 divisions under Heinz Guderian that made for Sedan, 2 under Georg Hans Reinhard that went to Monthermé, and another 2 further north under Hermann Hotz that went to Dinant. Georges has also decided, though, to send 6 divisions of reserves to back up Hunziker. But the direction they're sent assumes the Germans will pivot and try to attack the eastern border Maginot Line defenses from behind. So these reserves won't be in a position to respond to the German breakthrough when it happens. Hunziker thinks it the least vulnerable part of his command, so he has his best forces away on his right flank. Covering Sedan itself is just the B reserve troops that I've talked about before. By the 14th, the Germans have made crossings at 3 points: Sedan, Hoo, and Monthermé. Hoo is actually the first, and it is Erwin Rommel's men who've made the crossing. Heinz Guderian does not do this. He pivots west with the 1st and 2nd Panzer Divisions along the main road that follows the Meuse, leaving the 10th to consolidate. As for Korap's army, with Rommel at one end and Guderian at the other, it has begun to disintegrate, and he has been granted his request to pull back from the line of the Meuse to a line from Charleroi to Rethel, a line with no natural defenses. It is May the 15th that the Germans begin moving with speed after assaulting the now vacant fortifications along the Meuse. Nothing at all lay in Reinhardt's path, and he has covered some 60 kilometers by late afternoon the 15th.
But what about the French armored reserves under General Flavigny, including the 3rd Armored under General Brocard? On the 16th, Hoth's 15th Panzer Corps, spearheaded by Rommel's 7th Division, are east of Cambrai. Guderian is moving on Saint-Quentin. On the 18th, at the end of the week, both Saint-Quentin and Cambrai fall to the panzers. But with the rapidity of the advance, the German flanks now lay dangerously exposed. In Norway back on the 12th, French Foreign Legionnaires, supported by naval guns, landed near Bjerkvik. They managed to take it under heavy fire, capture Elvegårdsmoen with hand-to-hand combat, and reach the southern tip of Øyjord Peninsula, a springboard for an attack on Narvik. Meanwhile, German General Feuerstein's 2nd Gebirgsdivision is advancing north from Trondheim, 1,200 kilometers, to relieve the German forces in Narvik. The Allies now see that if they take Narvik, in order to hold it, they will also have to hold the town Boda to prevent the Germans from coming from Trondheim. Back on the 13th, the Chinese 33rd Army Group reaches Tongbaichang and cuts Japanese communications for several days. But the main part of that group had been encircled by the Japanese in the Dahong foothills, and it was there that Zhang is killed. By the beginning of this week, the Chinese think the Japanese are pulling back to their original bases and pursue them, but only on a very narrow front. So a Japanese counterattack pushes back the Chinese. After that, part 2 of the battle for Yichang begins, with the Japanese planning to root out and destroy the Chinese still in the Dahong Mountains, take Yichang itself, and secure Changchi. That's the plan. As the week begins, the British invasion of Iceland is complete, but the German one of France and the Benelux countries continues. On the 19th, most German armor is stopped to regroup between Péronne and Saint-Quentin. Charles de Gaulle's French 4th Armored Division tries again to attack the Germans north from around Léon. He makes progress this time, but is soon ordered to pull back. On the 20th, the German armor advances again. Amiens falls in the morning, and Abbeville in the evening. Advanced units even reach the coast at Noyelles. Germany now has a corridor, at least 20 miles wide, that's 32 kilometers, from the Ardennes to the Channel. Now, the obvious thing that the Allies must do at all costs is break through this corridor before its walls can be fortified, since that would totally cut off all the Allied forces to the north. Weygand wants to attack the German flanks from the north and south near Arras, where the line is thinnest, to break up the encirclement of Belgium and northeastern France. So the next day, the British attack Erwin Rommel's division around Arras. On the 22nd, the Germans at the coast turn to the north and make for Boulogne and Calais. But that night, Gort decides to withdraw his men from the exposed salient near Arras. The Germans have broken through the Belgians near Courtrai on the Luce, and Gort has to head north to plug the gap to keep open a route to Dunkirk on the Channel coast. On the coast now, though, even though the Germans have attacked both Boulogne and Calais, Boulogne falls at the end of the week, the main German armored force is ordered to halt the 24th, an order confirmed by Hitler. They have reached a line from Bethune to Gravelines, and sure, it's not great terrain for armor, but the Allied defenses are weak here. As this week begins, Calais surrenders to the Germans. The British begin to fall back towards Dunkirk, and evacuation is ordered, and the Belgian army is in dire straits. The German attack near Courtrai at the end of last week went across the British front, and those British troops, who had not been assigned to the then-planned counteroffensive, could have tried to attack the German flanks, but that didn't happen. On the 27th, German armor resumes its attack and tries to cut off the French and British around Lille. Most of them get away. On the 28th, some of the French First Army are holding out in Lille, but are now cut off from the evacuating forces. On the 29th, the Dunkirk perimeter contracts further. By day's end, most of the British and a lot of the French are in their evacuation positions. On the 30th, the German panzer forces begin to withdraw to the south for the next phase of their offensive operation. The Germans increase pressure on the ground as well, cracking the perimeter at Berge as the week comes to an end. On the 2nd, as this week begins, the Dunkirk perimeter, now manned by the French, is broken, but the Germans cannot get to the town itself. Still, the beach area is down to around just 2 miles. The Germans retire along Basefjord. With the Norwegians coming from the north, the French from the west, and the Poles from the southwest, it seems like just a matter of time before the Germans will have to surrender. On the right bank of the Han River are 6 Chinese armies defending the Yichang region. On the night of the 31st, the Japanese still send 2 divisions to make a surprise crossing and move on Yichang. Still, the Japanese manage to divide the Chinese and fight them in separate engagements, which enables them to push the Chinese back to the mountains to the west. By the 6th, the Japanese have occupied Jingmen and are now racing among themselves to see who can reach Yichang first, which they think the stepping stone to taking Chongqing itself.
Italy has Eritrea as an African colony and conquered Ethiopia a few years ago, so Britain is Italy's neighbor there in British Somaliland and British East Africa. In North Africa, Italy has Libya and borders Egypt, only some 700 kilometers from the Suez Canal, vital to Britain. Well, on the 11th, the Italian Air Force bombs Port Sudan and Aden. Also, 8 separate raids are made on Malta, currently a British colony. In return, Turin and Genoa are bombed by the RAF. An Italian sub sinks the cruiser Calypso off Crete, so on the 14th, French cruisers and destroyers shell Genoa and Vado. That day, the British 11th Hussars cross from Egypt to Libya and capture Fort Capuzzo. They had 140 divisions on this line in Army Groups A and B, and they were by now rested. The line facing them, the Weygand Line, stretched from the coast to Verdun and was the 10th, 7th, 6th, 2nd, and 3rd French armies from west to east. They number 49 divisions. Hermann Hoth's 15th Corps would strike between Amiens and the sea. Ewald von Kleist's 39th and 41st Panzer Corps across the Somme towards Peronne and Amiens, and Heinz Guderian's 2 Corps southward from the Ain. The ground attack began the 5th, after an artillery barrage from Léon to the Channel against the French forces, which included the British 51st Highland Division. There were reinforcements for them en route, in the form of the 1st Canadian Division and the 52nd Lowland Division. The Allies were forced back, though they fought well and inflicted heavy casualties. The Germans, though, had managed to capture 2 intact railway bridges over the Somme, and Erwin Rommel's 7th Panzer Division had, by the end of the day, powered through Le Quesnoy into the Loudon Valley. He covered nearly another 50 kilometers the 6th and dove into the French 10th Army. On the 7th, he pushed in the center, and by the 8th, and it was a rout by then, reached Elbeuf on the Seine. Behind him on his flank, Rouen fell that morning, and on his other flank, Manstein's infantry had reached the lower Seine, and by cutting through the center of the 10th Army, they had now succeeded in cutting off the French 9th Corps, which included the 51st Highland, between Rouen and Dieppe, and surrounding them by the 9th as this week begins. Further east on the Aisne on the 9th, Rundstedt's Army Group A attacks the newly formed French 4th Army Group under Charles Hunziker, withholding the line from Montmedy to Attaché. They are hit with both von Kleist's armor, who's moved over since the French had stopped him further west, and Heinz Guderian's. The French hold the Germans back, though they take heavy losses, and the Germans manage just 1 bridgehead over the Aisne. It is fairly obvious the French can't hold them for long, though, and they begin to disengage the 11th and pull back towards the Marne. But by this time, first Guderian's and then von Kleist's Panzer Corps have crossed the Aisne and are speeding south, reaching Rennes and making a bridgehead at Chalon-sur-Marne by the end of the day. Paris is now under threat from the west and the north. To the north, the 11th Iron Division sacrifices itself in Compiègne Forest to buy time for the French 7th Army to fall back to the Oise. The French are desperately fighting to hold the lower Seine. By the end of that day, all French forces in the west, the 7th, the 10th, and the Armée de Paris are pulling back to the Loire. On the 15th, Strasbourg and Verdun fall. On the 16th, Dijon falls to the Germans. The Maginot Line defenses on the Franco-German border and the 400,000 men manning them are now isolated but still holding out. The 17th, Heinz Guderian is nearly to the Swiss border. Other German units advance in Brittany and Normandy. Germany will occupy around 3/5 of France, north and west of a line from Geneva to Tours and then down to the Spanish border. And now the Italians cross at points all along the border, the 4th Army attacking in the mountains in the north and the 1st Army further south and along the coast. Along the Riviera, the 80,000 or so Italians advance almost 10 kilometers, but they are opposed by nearly 40,000 Frenchmen, which is the greatest concentration of soldiers the French have along the border. The Italians occupy Fontaine, but that's basically it. The Italians can't really advance either north or south here until they've taken the Col d'Enclave and Col de Bonhomme. On the 21st, advanced Italian units managed to take the French strongpoint approaching the Col d'Enclave. The Italians also attacked towards Bourg Saint-Maurice through the Petit Saint-Bernard Pass the 21st, but are unable to break through the French and break out of the pass. On the 18th, with a Japanese victory, they took Yisheng last week, which gives them control of the water routes of Hubei, Hunan, and Sichuan provinces, but also a base 400 kilometers from the nationalist capital at Chongqing, which they can now bomb relatively easily. Is that on the 16th, the Soviets enter Latvia and Estonia, and all three Baltic states are occupied. But the Italian Alpine Corps cannot reach Bourg Saint-Maurice, and the 1st Army Corps advances on Moudon but cannot reach it. On the coast, the Italian 1st Army does take Menton, a pretty good prize, but are nowhere near their goal of Nice when an armistice is signed. It includes Menton, but is only 832 square kilometers total area with under 30,000 inhabitants. On the 28th comes the Battle of the Espero Convoy, the first engagement of the war between Italian and Allied warships. Last week, as the Franco-German armistice goes into effect, the final Allied evacuations from France were finished. France and Italy also signed an armistice. The Soviet Union occupied parts of Romania. France and the Netherlands have been defeated by Germany, but they have big colonial holdings in the Far East, which have no real defense now, and which Japan certainly has its eye on. The Japanese have asked them for military bases in French Indochina to use in their war on the Chinese, and they're now negotiating this. On the 1st, the Italian Air Force starts bombing Palestine. On the 4th, the Italians occupy Kassala in Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. And this week on the 2nd, the Arandora Star is torpedoed off the Irish coast, dropping high explosive bombs at Aldershot. This comes a few days after Cardiff, Wales, one of the world's biggest coal ports, is bombed for the first time. On the 10th, 120 German fighters and bombers attack a shipping convoy in the Channel, while 70 bomb dockyards in South Wales. Cardiff is bombed the 10th and 12th, and on the 12th there are Luftwaffe raids also on Scotland and Northern Ireland. And British and Italian ships engaged the Italians July 9th at the Battle of Calabria. The Italian convoy ships making for Benghazi, the reason for this attack in the first place, make it through safely. In other Mediterranean naval news, on the 7th, French Admiral Geoffroy agrees to neutralize his ships at Alexandria. But at Casablanca and Dakar, the Navy is loyal to Vichy France. On July 12th, Britain officially agrees to close the Burma Road. The French Indochina route has been closed since June 19th. The invasion itself is to be on a broad front, from the east around Ramsgate all the way to beyond the Isle of Wight in the west. The Luftwaffe has been transferring air units to the European coast from Hamburg to Brest. British commandos launch Operation Ambassador against German-occupied Guernsey, as British and Australian ships defeat the Italians at the Battle of Cape Spada, leads 40 German Me-109s and 18 Dornier bombers against a shipping convoy in the Thames estuary. The new government pressures Vichy France to give the Japanese bases in French Indochina. The next day, the USSR annexes Bessarabia and North Bukovina, and they are mostly incorporated into the new Moldavian SSR. On the 3rd, they formally annex Lithuania, Latvia the 5th, and Estonia the 6th. On the 28th, Britain withdraws all destroyers from Dover to Portsmouth. Britain's defenses, though, as I've talked about before, include coastal radar, 50 stations running all the way from Land's End to the Orkney Islands, separated into 4 groups, 10, 11, 12, and 13, which are southwestern, southeastern, Midlands, and northern respectively, which are under overall control from Uxbridge. On August 1st, the Italian Navy establishes Beta Somme, its submarine base at Bordeaux. Force H leaves Gibraltar and is attacked the first by Italian aircraft, but repels them, then launches a distraction attack by air on Cagliari the 2nd. Operation Hurry is a success. The Italians launched an invasion of British Somaliland from Abyssinia. There were 3 lines of advance, to Zela in the north, Hargeisa in the center, and Odwena on the right. British Somaliland is isolated. Berbera, the capital, is a week from Mombasa by sea, and to get any reinforcements by land from Nairobi, they'd have to go through Italian Somaliland. Crossing the border August 4th, Zela and Hargeisa fall within 48 hours. By the end of the week, they are nearing Berbera, and they head towards the plains some 60 miles from Berbera, the capital. The enemies meet at the Tug Argan Gap. Italian troops will enter Berbera the 19th, and Benito Mussolini will annex British Somaliland to Italian East Africa. By taking British Somaliland, the Italians now control the southern entrance to the Red Sea. And what is to stop them from sweeping into Sudan? The RAF bombs the Fiat works in Turin and the Caproni works in Milan. And on the 17th, 3 British battleships bombard the Italians at Bardia. Germany also introduces long-range Condor planes for maritime use from their bases near Bordeaux. For the month of August, German U-boats sink 56 ships for 267,000 tons. Among several attacks, Kenly is so badly damaged, Manston airfield is ruined. On the 25th, the main German attack against Warmwell airfield is heavily escorted. On the 26th, the Germans send 3 raids against British airfields and 1 on Portsmouth. The RAF airfields at Biggin Hill, Manston, West Malling, Lymm, and Hawking are all more or less out of the fight. Gives a big chunk of Transylvania from Romania to Hungary and southern Dobruja to Bulgaria.
And with France defeated, Battle of Britain in full swing, and action heating up in Africa, the first year of World War II is over. This is an experimental format. If you want to see more videos like it, then let us know by liking the video and we may do another one for the next year. And also check out the World War II channel for full context and more maps.